On April 25, 2026, 12,000 fighters struck 6 Malian cities in the same hour. The defense minister was dead before sunrise, and the man running the only African alliance designed to stop this said nothing for 96 hours. Not a statement, not a press conference, not a single word directly to his people. Assimi Goïta, the president of Mali, the man Africa Corps was paid to protect, was evacuated from his own military base according to sources close to the presidential entourage, confirmed by RFI. His location? Undisclosed. His message? Silence. Meanwhile, the soldiers from Russia, the ones imported to guarantee security, were escorted out of Kidal by the very rebels they were hired to eliminate. While they were negotiating their exit, one of their helicopters was shot down. Everyone on board died. Here's what that means. The framework that was supposed to defend Sahel sovereignty, the foreign mercenaries, the security guarantees, the arrangement that cost Mali its diplomatic independence, collapsed in 48 hours. And here is what nobody is telling you. 9 days before the attack, the 3 generals of the AES sat in Ouagadougou, and according to reporting from modern Ghana, approved a plan to mobilize 15,000 troops for a joint response force. When Mali burned, not one of those troops moved. If you've been watching this alliance, if you believed the AES was real, that the sovereignty movement had teeth, this video is the stress test that nobody prepared you for. Because Ibrahim Traore, the man who called it a monster conspiracy, the man sitting in Bobo Dioulasso when Bamako fell under fire, had to make a decision. The most important decision of 2026. And what he chose changes everything you thought you knew about what is coming next. The timeline begins at 4:56 in the morning. That is when the first explosions were reported near Kati, the military base where President Assimi Goïta, pronounced Goita, was headquartered. Within minutes, gunfire erupted simultaneously across Bamako, Kidal, Gao, Mopti, and Sévaré. 6 cities, 1 hour. This was not a raid. This was a siege. According to Al Jazeera and NPR, who confirmed events on the ground, the coordinated nature of the assault had never been seen before in Mali's decade-long conflict. Multiple military installations hit at the same moment. Roads blocked. Communication severed. The first named casualty was Sadio Camara, Minister of Defense for the Mali Junta. He was not killed on a battlefield. He was killed at his home. A vehicle bomb drove directly into the building where he lived with members of his family. The explosion caused his death and the deaths of those inside. That was not the only high-value target. According to the continuously updated record of the 2026 Mali attacks, Modibo Kone, the head of Mali's National State Security Agency, was struck by multiple gunshots and seriously wounded. General Oumar Diarra, Chief of Staff of the Malian Armed Forces, was also wounded in the same period. 3 senior commanders, one night, all disabled simultaneously. This was not a coincidence. This was a decapitation attempt. By mid-morning on April 25th, Kidal had fallen. Mopti was under what the attacking forces described as complete control. Gao was partially occupied, with Malian forces holding only the airport perimeter. The international airport in Bamako itself came under direct attack before being repelled. Do you understand what that means? 3 men responsible for directing the military response, all out of action within hours of the opening strike. Now, let us talk about Africa Corps, the Russian force currently operating in Mali, roughly 2,500 personnel, according to security analysts, was deployed specifically for this kind of threat. That was the arrangement. That was the guarantee. When armed groups threatened the state, Africa Corps would respond. What happened in Kidal tells a different story. According to reporting on April 27th citing analyst Paweł Wojcik, Africa Corps assembled their vehicles at the former MINUSMA base and prepared to leave. They did not fight their way out. They negotiated. And their negotiating partner was the Tuareg separatist group, the same organization they were contracted to eliminate. That group gave Africa Corps a safe corridor out of the city. Russia accepted. The Malian soldiers at the same location received no such offer. Kidal had been recaptured by Russia's forces in November 2023. That was celebrated as a turning point. Proof that the partnership was working. It took 48 hours to lose it all back. And while that withdrawal was being negotiated, a Russian My-8AMTSH military helicopter was shot down near Gao by a surface-to-air missile. According to reporting from Ground News and SOFX, everyone on board died. At the exact same moment Africa Corps was arranging its own exit from Kidal. That is not a setback. That is a collapse. Meanwhile, the man at the top of the Malian government was nowhere to be found. By April 26th, President Goita had not spoken publicly. Sources close to his entourage confirmed to RFI that he had been evacuated from Kadi to what they described as a safe location at a special forces base, location undisclosed. His one visible action in the following 48 hours, he was driven through the streets of Bamako once, a convoy intended to disprove evacuation rumors. No speech, no address, no explanation. The announcement of 2 days of national mourning for Defense Minister Kamara was made by a government spokesperson, not by the president directly. Africanews described it precisely. The junta leader's silence is deepening Mali's political crisis. 96 hours without a word. The curfew in Bamako held. The U.S. Embassy raised its travel warning to level 4. Kidal remained under separatist control. Mopti under jihadist control. And the president of the Alliance of Sahel States, Ibrahim Traore, was watching from Bobo Dioulasso, pronounced Bobo Dioulasso, where he had been opening a national cultural festival when the first explosion hit. He condemned the attack. He called it a monstrous conspiracy. He did not deploy a soldier. But what Traore found in that research document, the one that no government in the region wanted you to acknowledge, would reframe everything about how this attack had been made possible. Here is what the mainstream coverage missed. At the exact moment Africa Corps was negotiating a safe exit from Kidal, one of their helicopters was being shot down 60 miles away, leaving and dying at the same time. Surface-to-air missiles are not improvised weapons. They require logistics, supply chains, funding. Someone gave those rebels the equipment to bring down a military helicopter mid-negotiation. Someone planned this in advance. And the alliance that was supposed to answer exactly this kind of external threat, it had 15,000 troops already authorized. That meeting was 9 days before the attack. What nobody is asking is who decided those troops would not move. 9 days. That is how long before the attack that the chiefs of army staff of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger met in Ouagadougou, pronounced Ouagadougou, April 16th and 17th, 2026. According to Modern Ghana's reporting, the stated purpose of that meeting was to coordinate regional security and to formally mobilize 15,000 joint troops for the AES Collective Defense Force. 15,000 troops, authorized, on paper, 9 days before Mali burned. When the attack began on April 25th, the AES issued a statement. The statement condemned the attacks. It described them as coordinated aggression aimed at sowing terror and destabilizing the state. It affirmed full, unconditional, and brotherly solidarity with the people of Mali. No troops moved, not from Burkina Faso, not from Niger. The solidarity was diplomatic. The response was verbal. And the 15,000 authorized soldiers stayed exactly where they were. The AES communique, issued from Ouagadougou, signed by all 3 member states, ran to 4 paragraphs. It named the attackers. It expressed solidarity. It assigned blame to unnamed hostile actors working against the Sahel's sovereignty process. 4 paragraphs. No deployment orders. No emergency session of the military command. No activation of the joint force. For a document announcing the worst security event in the alliance's history, it read like a routine condemnation. The kind of statement you issue when you're watching something happen and have decided, for reasons not stated publicly, not to intervene directly. Now, some will argue this is understandable. The AES is young. Collective defense takes time to operationalize. The roads are difficult. Here is the problem with that explanation. The attack was not random. It was not opportunistic. According to a field commander speaking to FDD's Long War Journal on April 26th, the operation had been planned for months. The coordination between JNIM, a jihadist group linked to al-Qaeda, and the Tuareg separatist group FLA was not spontaneous. These 2 organizations have fundamentally different goals. JNIM seeks to impose Islamic law across the entire country. FLA seeks an independent Azawad state in the north. They are ideologically incompatible. They have fought each other. Their fighters have eliminated each other. And yet they coordinated the most sophisticated joint operation in West African history. How? Because they shared one enemy, the government in Bamako. And because, for the first time ever, they announced a formal military cooperation agreement and committed to it publicly before the attack began. That is unprecedented. That does not happen by accident. The geography of what fell in those first 48 hours tells you exactly how prepared this was. Kidal is over 1,000 kilometers from Bamako. To coordinate simultaneous attacks there and in the capital, in Gao, in Mopti, and in Sévaré, you need communication infrastructure, logistics networks, and pre-positioned assets across the entire country. This was not assembled in a week. According to the CFR Global Conflict Tracker, ACLED recorded 3,737 security incidents across the Sahel in 2025, with 9,362 fatalities. That is a force that has been expanding year over year, despite Africa Corps being present. And now it had found a coalition partner with access to northern supply routes. Mali's Prime Minister Abdoulaye Maiga said it directly. The scale and precision of the coordination, the simultaneous targeting of 6 cities, this reflects foreign funding. His words, on the record. And then there is the Algeria question. In January 2024, the Malian military government canceled all outstanding agreements with Algeria and expelled the Algerian ambassador, citing, in their words, interference in Mali's internal affairs. Algeria has historically maintained relationships with Tuareg communities across the northern Sahel. They had established communication lines with armed groups operating in the region. That was the basis of their mediation role. According to sources cited in the documented record of the 2026 Mali attacks, personnel close to the Malian military have accused Algeria of providing material support to JNIM in connection with the April operation. Algeria has denied this. The accusation has not been independently verified, but the sequence deserves to be stated clearly. Mali expelled Algeria in January 2024. By April 2026, JNIM and the Tuareg separatist forces, groups with established Algerian connections, had formed an unprecedented coalition and executed an attack that disabled 3 Malian command posts in one night. There is one more detail about the 15,000 troop authorization that has been almost entirely absent from English language coverage. The joint force approved on April 16th was not a new idea. It had been in planning for months. The Ouagadougou meeting was the culmination of a coordination process, not its beginning. The generals had talked. The plans existed. The authorization was formalized. 9 days later, when it was needed, nothing moved. That is not a logistics failure. That is a decision. Somewhere in that chain of command, someone made a choice. And if you want to understand what Ibrahim Traore is actually facing, not the symbol, not the speech, you have to understand why that choice was made. And the answer to that question brings us directly to the man himself. 9 days, 15,000 troops, zero movement. That is not a coincidence. That is a decision. Someone in that command structure chose not to activate the joint force. And that decision did not happen in a vacuum. Because what comes next, documented by the Robert Lansing Institute and published April 27th, is that the security arrangement Mali was relying on was not just failing. According to their analysis, the groups that Africa Corps was supposed to suppress had actually expanded their territory since Russian forces arrived, not held the line, expanded. And Traore, who has access to this data, had to decide what to do with that information. Let us go back to April 26th. Ibrahim Traore, Captain President of Burkina Faso, rotating chair of the Alliance of Sahel States, was in Bobo Dioulasso. He was presiding over the opening of the Semaine Nationale de la Culture, the National Cultural Week, the 22nd edition of Burkina Faso's largest annual festival. The symbolism of that moment deserves examination. This is the man who nationalized the gold mines, who expelled the French ambassador, who shut down the French military base, who dissolved 118 NGOs in a single decree, who said publicly on April 3rd of this year that democracy kills and called for an entirely different political framework. He was at a cultural festival while the partner state of his own alliance was fighting for survival in 6 cities simultaneously. That is not a criticism. It is a data point. Because what Traore did in the hours that followed, and how precisely he named what was happening, reveals what he understood that most observers did not. Within hours of the attack becoming clear, Traore issued a statement in his capacity as AES chair. He described the attack as a monstrueux complot, a monstrous conspiracy, and stated explicitly that the scale and coordination of the assault showed long preparation and the involvement of what he called hostile actors working against the sovereignty of the Sahel. He was not vague. He was not diplomatic. He named the system. And this is where this video diverges from every other analysis you will find about the Mali attack. The Western press covered this as a military story. Russia failed. JNIM advanced. Africa Corps retreated. 2 sentences in The Guardian. A segment on France 24. What they did not cover, because it does not fit the established frame, is the structural question the attack forces onto the table. Remember the details from the first section of this video, the decapitation pattern, the simultaneous targeting of 3 commanders, the coordination across 6 cities that required months of preparation. Traore looked at the same facts you heard in the first 8 minutes and arrived at a specific conclusion. This was designed. This was organized. And the target was not Mali. The target was the AES. If he believed that, and his statement says he did, then why did the alliance not respond militarily? He had the authority. The rotating chair has political mandate to convene emergency security sessions. The joint force authorization already existed. 15,000 troops. Approved. On paper. And Traore, specifically, had demonstrated that he was capable of rapid action when he judged the situation required it. This is the man who expelled an ambassador in 48 hours, who signed a dissolution order for over 100 organizations in a single decree. The fact that he condemned the attack, called it a monster conspiracy, accused external forces, and then did not activate the joint force is not an oversight. It is a calculation. What was he calculating? This is where the Robert Lansing Institute report becomes essential. Records published on April 27th, the same day Traore issued his condemnation, indicate that the jihadist group's Africa Corps was contracted to suppress had actually expanded their operational territory since Russian forces arrived in Mali. Not held steady, expanded. The report notes that casualties related to violent extremism reached record levels in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso in the first half of 2024, with Russian forces present throughout the entire period. That data tells Traore something specific. It tells him the Africa Corps model, import foreign security, pay in diplomatic independence, does not produce security. It has been tested. The results are documented. You pay the cost of sovereignty, and you get more instability, not less. If Traore sends Burkina Faso forces into Mali under the current framework, without a fundamental reconfiguration of how the AES responds to threats, he risks replicating the same dynamic. He extends his forces, the groups adapt, the territory contracts. And Burkina Faso absorbs the same lesson Mali has been learning for 3 years. But Burkina Faso has something Mali does not. It has the VDP, the Volunteers for the Defense of the Fatherland, community integrated, locally trusted, working with intelligence that comes from within communities, not imposed from outside them. The Small Wars Journal documented in March 2026 that Africa Corps' intelligence failures in Mali stemmed directly from breaking community trust, the opposite of everything the VDP represents. Traore built that model. He has been running it, and it is not what Africa Corps brought to Mali. And the fact that you are still watching, that you made it this far, means you already understand something that most political analysts refuse to say out loud. The AES was built on a narrative of sovereignty, but its military architecture had never been tested under real pressure until April 25th. Traore is not paralyzed. He is not silent in the way Goita is silent. He is deciding what kind of alliance the AES becomes from this moment forward. That decision will either prove that the Pan-African sovereignty movement has a real mechanism behind its rhetoric, or it will confirm what the proxy destabilization architecture has been betting on all along, that the alliance fractures the moment genuine pressure arrives. Traore had the troops, he had the mandate. The question was never whether he could act. The question was whether acting, in the wrong way, under the wrong framework, would cost him everything the alliance has built. Here is a number that changes the entire calculation. According to the Robert Lansing Institute, published April 27, 2026, the group's Africa Corps was paid to suppress, have expanded their territory since Russia arrived in Mali. Casualties reached record levels, not despite the foreign security presence, because of the model it represents. Mali paid in sovereignty. It got more instability. Burkina Faso shares a border with Mali. And if the same proxy destabilization architecture that broke Mali is now targeting the alliance of Sahel states as a whole, then the decision Traore makes in the next 72 hours is not just about Mali. It is about everything that comes after. Let us step back from the events themselves and examine the system. The proxy destabilization architecture does not require an army to destroy a government. It requires 3 things: an internal fracture to exploit, a willing proxy force to activate, and a supply network capable of escalating the conflict at precisely the right moment. In Mali, all 3 were already in place. The internal fracture was the relationship between the Bamako government and the northern Tuareg communities, a grievance that has existed since independence in 1960 and was never genuinely resolved. The proxy forces were JNIM and the Tuareg separatist movement, ideologically opposed but tactically available. The supply network is the question nobody has officially answered. Where did the surface-to-air missiles come from? Where did the coordination infrastructure come from? How does an al-Qaeda affiliate and a Tuareg separatist movement, which have historically fought each other, suddenly find the communication channels and the trust to execute a six-city operation in one morning? The Malian Prime Minister said it directly: foreign funding. Traore said it directly: hostile actors, external forces, long preparation. What we can observe is the pattern. In February 2026, 2 months before the April attack, JNIM launched a week-long series of coordinated strikes across eastern and northern Burkina Faso. The Stimson Center documented this campaign in detail. It demonstrated something critical. The operational range of JNIM was no longer contained to any single country. They were a Sahel-wide force, and the pattern of expansion follows a geographic logic that is not random. JNIM was founded in Mali. It grew in the vacuum left by French withdrawal and the failure of successive Malian governments to address northern grievances. It then expanded into Niger, particularly into the Tillabéri region, where attacks multiplied after the 2023 transition of power. It then pushed southwest into Burkina Faso's eastern and northern provinces, and in April 2026, the largest coordinated strike in its history hit the capital itself. This is not a movement that is being contained. It is a movement that is advancing systematically toward the center of AES territory. Now, here is what that means for the alliance specifically. The AES was formed precisely as an answer to this kind of threat, and to the international community's failure to address it. The three countries left ECOWAS. They rejected the MINU SMA peacekeeping framework. They expelled the French military. They brought in Africa Corps. They declared a new model of security based on sovereignty rather than external dependency. April 25th was the first major test of that model. The test result: Africa Corps retreated under rebel escort. The joint force was not activated. The president of the Corps member state went silent for 96 hours. And the alliance chair, for all his rhetorical clarity about the nature of the threat, made a political calculation not to send troops. Remember what we established in the first section of this video: the Mi-8 helicopter going down while Africa Corps negotiated its exit. The three commanders disabled in a single night. The precision of the target selection. That level of operational intelligence requires real-time information. Someone knew the defense minister's home address. Someone knew when to strike carry. Someone knew the movement patterns of the chief of staff. The proxy destabilization architecture does not just arm proxy groups. It provides intelligence. It coordinates timing. It ensures that the strike is not merely devastating but symbolically precise, designed to produce maximum psychological impact on leadership. That is what happened on April 25th. There is a second dynamic worth naming directly. Research from the Africa Defense Forum published in March 2026 confirmed that China had surpassed Russia as the largest arms exporter to sub-Saharan Africa. This is not a coincidence of timing. Russia's resources are being consumed by the war in Ukraine. Africa Corps, operating in Mali and the Central African Republic, and in several other Sahel-adjacent states, is expensive, increasingly ineffective, and now dramatically less credible after Kidal. China is not entering the AES relationship directly. It does not need to. China provides arms. China builds infrastructure. China maintains trade relationships that generate dependency without requiring the diplomatic and reputational cost of having soldiers on the ground. From a structural influence perspective, a destabilized AES is not a problem for every external actor. For some, it is an opportunity. A weakened alliance accelerates the search for new security partners. A search for new security partners creates openings for economic leverage, with none of the exposure that Russia is now visibly experiencing. This is not speculation about intentions. This is how structural influence has operated across the continent for decades. Different actors, same mechanism, different century. And the United States military withdrawal from its African presence, documented in 2026 analysis from Newsweek, has not created a cleaner balance of power. It has created competition between external actors running simultaneous, often contradictory, security relationships in states that are too fragile to manage that competition without fracturing. Mali is not failing because of any single external actor. Mali is becoming a theater where external competition plays out, and the people living inside it absorb the cost. The AES was supposed to be the answer to exactly that dynamic. If it does not develop an indigenous security architecture, one that does not require importing external forces to fight external funded proxy groups, then it becomes the same theater under a different name. This is what Ibrahim Traore understands. This is what makes his position extraordinary and his decision genuinely consequential. He is not choosing between intervening and not intervening. He is choosing what kind of intervention actually means something. A symbolic military deployment into a deteriorating theater, or a fundamental restructuring of how the AES defends its members, starting from community intelligence, starting from the VDP model, starting from a security architecture that does not reproduce the dependency it was built to replace? Those are not equivalent choices. The proxy destabilization architecture had one final card to play, and it was not pointed at Mali. Let us be clear about what this 48-hour window has proven. First, the Africa Corps model has failed, not as a hypothesis, not as a geopolitical theory, but as a documented operational reality. The forces paid to guarantee Mali's security retreated under the escort of the groups they were contracted to eliminate. The territory they recaptured in 2023 was lost in 2 days. The jihadist forces they were contracted to suppress expanded since their arrival. This is not the failure of one battle. This is the failure of a strategic premise. Second, the AERL's declaratory commitments, 15,000 troops, joint response force, unconditional solidarity, mean nothing without a functional activation mechanism. Condemning an attack is not defending against one. The distance between the alliance's stated capability and its actual response was on full display this week. That gap is not sustainable. If the AES does not close it, the proxy destabilization architecture will continue to exploit it. That architecture is still active, and it is still watching. Third, Ibrahim Traore is now facing the defining test of his leadership. Not the speeches, not the expulsions, not the nationalizations. Those decisions were made from a position of relative control on Burkina Faso's own timetable. This is different. The attack happened to a partner state. The response window is narrowing. The system behind the attack has not been dismantled. And the choice Traore makes, whether to restructure how the AES defends its members or to absorb this moment as an isolated event, will determine whether the sovereignty movement he represents is a political posture or a functional reality. The silence from Bamako, the convoy through empty streets, the statement without deployment orders. Those were the sounds of a system being stress-tested for the first time. The question the proxy destabilization architecture has been designed to answer is simple. When real pressure is applied, does the AES hold? Or does it fracture? We do not have the full answer yet. What we have is this. One man in Burkina Faso who understands exactly what is happening, who named the system, who identified the pattern before most governments acknowledged it, who was building an alternative security model before any of this began. If Ibrahim Traore moves next with community intelligence, with a regional architecture that does not reproduce the dependency it was meant to replace, with the VDP framework as its foundation, then April 25th, 2026 becomes the moment the Pan-African sovereignty movement grew into something real. If he does not, the proxy destabilization architecture will have won the most consequential round it has ever played. This is not about Mali. If this video showed you something that the mainstream coverage missed, if the connection between the helicopter going down, the 96 hours of silence, the 15,000 troops that did not move, and the name of the system behind it all landed differently than what you have been reading elsewhere, then you already understand why this conversation matters. Like this video if it changed how you read the news coming out of Mali this week. Share it with someone who is still looking at the 30-second alerts and thinking they have the full picture. And drop the decision, your country. And one thing this video changed in how you see the AES in the comments below. Let's see who's actually paying attention. The next video in this series goes deeper into what an AES security architecture that actually works would need to look like, and why the VDP model is the one framework that has not yet been tried at regional scale. The link is on screen now. The silence has ended. The decision is being made. Pay attention.